Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. We unpack complex ideas, distill key insights from a stack of sources, and really aim to give you those aha moments that truly deepen your understanding.
Exactly. Making sense of the complexity.
Precisely. And today, we're diving into a phenomenon that feels increasingly urgent, across the global political landscape. You know that feeling, that unsettling sense that the very ground beneath our democracies is subtly shifting.
It's palpable sometimes.
It is. For many of us who rigorously track the intricate, often beautiful, but sometimes terrifying dance of political systems, there's a distinct chill in the air. We're talking something called competitive authoritarianism.
Right. Not the old school coup.
No, this isn't the dramatic old-school military coup we often imagine.
Yeah.
Instead, it's a state where elections, well, they might still occur, but the playing field is so meticulously tilted, so subtly manipulated, that it's barely recognizable as a genuinely fair contest.
It looks democratic on the surface, maybe.
Kind of. But what if the very systems designed to protect our freedoms are being systematically dismantled? Not through overt, loud takeovers, but through quiet, insidious, seemingly legal maneuvers.
And the profound insight here, what truly stands out, I think, is that the gravest threat isn't always that dramatic, visible coup. It's often this quiet, almost bureaucratic creep.
A creep, yeah.
This process, which scholars term entrenchment, it often disguises itself as, reform or stability, makes it insidiously hard to detect until it's really deeply rooted.
So it's deliberate.
Oh, absolutely. It's a deliberate, coordinated effort to consolidate power and systematically weaken rivals, all under the guise of legitimate governance. The term entrenchment itself, it evokes something being dug in, right? Becoming permanent, deeply rooted, a far cry from the spontaneous chaos we might typically associate with political upheaval.
Okay, so in this deep dive, our mission is to really understand the tactical playbook of these would-be authoritarians. We're going to meticulously dissect this process from, the subtle erosion of democratic norms right up to the aggressive capture of state institutions.
Getting into the weeds of it.
Exactly. We'll examine some, frankly, chilling case studies from around the world that starkly illustrate this process of entrenchment. And, crucially, we'll confront the really important question. Is such a slide irreversible?
That's the key question, isn't it?
It is. Can democracies, once seemingly on a path of no return, actually discover and implement strategies for return, effectively reasserting their foundational principles?
And it's such a critical inquiry because, the stakes couldn't be higher, right? The ability to reverse these trends means the fundamental difference between a society where power can still be peacefully transferred through the will of the people and one where it becomes locked in, potentially for generations, through systemic manipulation. This isn't just an academic exercise. It defines the future of governance and, individual liberty.
That distinction is paramount. Okay, let's unpack how this actually unfolds. Our roadmap for today will guide us through a pretty complex landscape.
Okay.
We'll begin by analyzing some concerning signals right here in the U.S., which many observers interpret as harbingers of this entrenchment we're talking about. Then we'll meticulously dissect the three core tactics employed by competitive authoritarians: rule manipulation, institutional capture through patronage, and the pervasive use of fear as a tool of control.
The trifecta.
The trifecta, yeah. Following that, we'll dive deep into two stark international examples, Hungary and Turkey, to witness these tactics playing out in real-world capture sequences.
Seeing it in action.
Exactly. But it's not all grim. We'll also examine the encouraging, albeit partial, democratic reversals witnessed in Slovakia and Brazil, extracting vital lessons from their struggles.
Some hope there.
Definitely some hope. Finally, we'll synthesize these insights into a practical pro-democracy playbook, outlining how guardrails can be built and robust coalitions forged. We'll also critically scrutinize that appealing, yet often false, promise of stability frequently offered by those seeking permanent power.
That stability trap.
Right. Throughout this deep dive, we'll continually contextualize all of this with the latest global democratic indicators, helping us understand the gravity and scope of this crucial moment for democratic governance worldwide. Hashtag DOJ election-intrusions, a harbinger of entrenchment. Okay, so let's set the scene with something that felt incredibly close to home or, perhaps still resonates today. Imagine it's the summer of 2025. Alarms are sounding across the United States.
Okay.
This isn't merely a drill. U.S. election officials are raising profound concerns about what they describe as unprecedented federal encroachment into state-run voting systems. The central actor here is the Department of Justice, operating under, let's say, President Trump's second-term leadership in this scenario.
And what's particularly striking about this hypothetical scenario, I think, is the inherent nature and the expansive scope of the actions supposedly undertaken by the DOJ.
Yeah.
They dispatched what are characterized as sweeping requests to at least 15 states. And crucially, these were far from routine inquiries, right?
Not at all.
They aggressively demanded comprehensive voter registration lists, and perhaps even more startling, began inquiring about access to voting machines. This represents a significant deviation extending well beyond typical federal oversight or, established assistance protocols for elections.
And the details coming out of places like Colorado in this scenario really drive that home, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
A consultant explicitly linked to the White House directly approached county clerks, and their request was remarkably specific to determine if federal agents or third parties could inspect voting equipment.
Wow.
The response from one Republican clerk, for example, was immediate and absolutely unequivocal.
Mm-hmm.
She flatly rebuffed the request, stating, and I quote, "A hard stop. Nobody gets access to my voting equipment."
Good for her.
Right. This response powerfully encapsulates the traditional robust view of election security and the sanctity of the voting process as a primarily local and state responsibility.
And this wasn't just an isolated incident in this picture, but rather part of a sustained campaign, you're saying.
Exactly.
So over a period of several months, the DOJ's voting section intensified its pressure, demanding all records of recent elections from states. Furthermore, they proposed what they carefully termed information-sharing deals with states.
Information-sharing deals sounds innocuous.
Right. Ostensibly to hunt for voter fraud. But while presented as legitimate action to ensure election integrity, the underlying mechanism inherently and dramatically expands federal reach into what has always been, by constitutional design, a predominantly state and local domain. This is where that subtle erosion really begins, isn't it?
It's such a critical distinction. This outreach was characterized by observers as unusually expansive and a dramatic federal intrusion. Consider the fundamental principle at play here. America's election administration has always been traditionally managed by state and local authorities.
That decentralization is key.
It is. This decentralized system isn't merely a historical quirk. It's explicitly by constitutional design. It's a foundational principle intended to distribute power, creating multiple points of control to prevent any single authority from monopolizing or manipulating the electoral process.
A safeguard.
Precisely. And the alarm raised by state officials was notably bipartisan. Both Democrats and Republicans reacted with genuine concern, underscoring that this perceived threat transcended mere partisan opposition and struck at the very heart of established democratic norms.
Which raises an important question about justification, right? How were these actions publicly framed by the administration in this scenario?
Well, Trump's spokesperson, for instance, defended the push as fighting for election integrity, which, as you know, is a common public justification for such moves in many competitive authoritarian regimes.
We hear that phrase a lot.
We do. However, many independent observers offered a starkly different interpretation, viewing it as a clear harbinger of competitive authoritarian entrenchment.
There's that word again, entrenchment.
Exactly. The critical insight here is that entrenchment, in this context, implies a bid to centralize control over the electoral machinery in favor of the incumbent, directly undermining the foundational fairness and impartiality of the democratic contest.
So it's not about winning an election fairly.
No.
It's about controlling the very mechanism of winning.
Precisely. And these actions by the DOJ in this 2025 scenario weren't isolated anomalies. They were part of a broader, discernible pattern of parallel maneuvers by the administration. For instance, President Trump also called for a special prosecutor to relitigate his 2020 loss, which, from an analytical perspective, demonstrates a consistent and persistent pattern of challenging past electoral outcomes long after they are certified.
Right, refusing to accept results.
Exactly. There was also documented pressure on allies in Texas to gerrymander congressional maps for partisan gain, revealing a multi-pronged, highly coordinated approach to securing partisan advantage, not just for a single election, but for sustained political dominance.
So it's particularly striking how these seemingly disparate actions, when you look closely, actually coalesce into a larger, coherent strategy.
Mm-hmm.
The DOJ voter data gambit, when viewed through this analytical lens, foreshadowed how rule changes and institutional capture can consolidate power in a creeping autocracy. This isn't about a sudden violent overthrow of the state. It's about a gradual systemic erosion from within.
That creeping quality again.
Often leveraging existing legal frameworks and then meticulously bending them to serve an autocratic agenda. This methodical approach is precisely what sets the stage for our deeper dive into the precise mechanics of power consolidation.
The subtle shift.
Okay, quick pause. So far, we've unpacked how this idea of competitive authoritarianism operates not through, dramatic coups, but these subtle, seemingly legal shifts.
Right. And we saw how that theoretical playbook started to look like it might manifest in real-world scenarios, like that hypothetical 2025 DOJ election intrusion example,
which many viewed as a deliberate step towards incumbent entrenchment. The key insight being, it's not about outright revolution, but this methodical dismantling from within.
a slow, steady creep.
Exactly. Okay, so if that DOJ scenario was a powerful harbinger, let's now meticulously dissect the core mechanics of how competitive authoritarians actually dig in and consolidate power.
Getting into the nuts and bolts.
Exactly. Scholars define entrenchment as a coordinated effort to dig in, cement power, and weaken rivals. It is, by its very nature, not accidental. It is a highly deliberate, multifaceted strategy.
Intentional.
Very intentional. And it's fundamentally driven by three reinforcing tactics that, crucially, do not operate in isolation, but rather strengthen each other. You mentioned the trifecta earlier.
Right.
Rewriting rules, installing loyalists, what we precisely term patronage, and intimidating or purging opponents through the pervasive use of fear.
Rule changes, patronage, fear. Got it.
And we've even observed glimpses of all three patterns discussed in hypothetical scenarios involving, say, a second Trump term, underscoring their contemporary relevance.
And a crucial point here, one that I think bears deep consideration, is how rule changes, as the first tactic, are often deceptively disguised.
How so?
Well, they very frequently come cloaked in legalism, presenting themselves as legitimate and necessary adjustments or even, structural reforms to existing systems.
Taking it sound reasonable.
Exactly. This involves a meticulous manipulation of laws and established procedures under a facade of normalcy, which makes them incredibly difficult to immediately identify as authoritarian moves. They appear to adhere to the letter of the law, making them insidious and resistant to early challenge.
Okay, can you elaborate on some concrete examples? How might this actually play out in a practical sense?
Certainly. In a hypothetical second Trump term, for example, we might observe election rule changes being aggressively pursued by Trump-aligned officials at both federal and state levels.
Right.
Specific examples could include things like aggressive voter roll purges, which involve systematically removing names from voter lists, potentially disenfranchising legitimate voters under the guise of cleaning up records.
Which sounds okay, cleaning up, but...
But the effect can be disenfranchisement, yeah. We could also see the implementation of stricter ID laws, which, while often superficially justified as anti-fraud measures, frequently disproportionately affect certain demographics, thereby making it significantly harder for them to cast their ballots.
Creating barriers.
Creating barriers, exactly. Additionally, there would likely be immense pressure on states to redraw districts to entrench his party's advantage, a classic gerrymandering tactic designed to predetermine electoral outcomes. And importantly, drawing a direct line back to our previous discussion.
The DOJ example.
Yes, the administration's drive to obtain state voter data and potentially inspect voting machines is itself a very clear form of rule subversion. It's bending federal power, which is explicitly meant to be a neutral check to supervise or directly influence state election processes in a manner that systematically benefits the incumbent.
So the objective isn't merely about winning a fair electoral contest, but fundamentally about rigging the very rules of the game itself.
Precisely. It's about manipulating the framework of the contest before it even begins. And we've observed this insidious pattern playing out internationally with stark clarity, particularly in Hungary under Viktor Orban.
Orban.
Right. After coming to power, he famously utilized his supermajority to overhaul election laws and gerrymander districts in a remarkably swift manner. The effect was profound and immediate. It tilted the electoral playing field so heavily and systematically that the opposition struggled to compete on fair terms.
Just couldn't win.
It became incredibly difficult. This wasn't about fostering competitive elections where different parties had an equal opportunity to win. It was about systematically engineering an overwhelming and durable advantage for the ruling party. Autocrats, across the board, consistently justify these extensive legal overhauls as essential reforms for, efficiency or integrity, claiming to be making the system better or more secure.
The public justification.
Always. However, the actual invariable outcome is that these changes systematically favor the incumbent side and meticulously erode existing checks on power, thereby unequivocally revealing their true autocratic purpose behind the legalistic language.
Okay, that brings us to the second, equally vital tactic: patronage and the deliberate capture of institutions. This strategy involves meticulously staffing the entire system with loyalists, thereby converting what should be neutral, impartial state bodies into partisan tools. It's akin to replacing the objective, finely tuned gears of a complex machine with gears that are deliberately designed to only turn in one predetermined direction.
This is indeed a critical pillar of entrenchment. Would-be authoritarians consciously and systematically stack key positions with loyalists, thereby converting neutral state bodies into partisan tools. This action fundamentally undermines the impartial functioning of government, which isn't just a nicety, right? It's an absolute prerequisite for any healthy and functioning democracy.
And this isn't just a theoretical concept, it has very real contemporary applications. President Trump, for example, has openly discussed and planned to purge the nonpartisan civil service should he return to office.
He's been quite explicit about it.
Very. His rhetoric on this point has been remarkably direct, even confrontational, describing career officials as rogue bureaucrats and explicitly vowing to clean out the deep state.
Loaded terms.
Absolutely. The explicit stated goal here is to replace these experienced nonpartisan professionals with loyal appointees who will unequivocally follow the political narrative, effectively transforming expert public servants into political instruments, subservient to a specific agenda. His allies, demonstrating a high degree of organization, have even gone so far as to compile comprehensive lists of tens of thousands of potential loyalists to install across federal agencies.
Wow, tens of thousands. That shows a highly organized, systematic approach to achieve wholesale institutional capture. It's not haphazard.
Not at all.
And the parallels with Orban's Hungary are strikingly illustrative here. Following his Fidesz party's victory in 2010, they aggressively replaced experienced civil servants with party cadres across the entire governmental bureaucracy.
It's how they manage that.
A specific legal mechanism, the 2010 Civil Service Law, was shrewdly enacted to enable the dismissal of some 1,600 career bureaucrats without cause.
Without cause.
Without cause, which allowed Fidesz to swiftly and systematically fill all key positions with loyalists. The consequence was a rapid and profound loss of expertise across the public administration, resulting in an administration that, instead of impartially serving the public interest, served the ruling party above all.
And that had economic effects, too.
Oh, significant ripple effects, including a substantial economic impact. These new loyal cadres were pressured to steer lucrative state contracts to Fidesz-linked businesses, thereby creating a self-serving patronage network that further solidified the regime's economic power base and financial control.
So it evolves beyond mere political loyalty to effectively constructing an entire economic machine that directly benefits the party in power. We see very clear echoes of this in current U.S. discussions, particularly with initiatives like Trump's heritage-backed Project 2025.
Project 2025, yes.
Its explicit stated aim is to politicize the civil and foreign service by designating thousands of federal jobs as Schedule F, meaning they transition into at-will roles that can be filled and, crucially, fired solely at the president's discretion, bypassing traditional merit-based protections.
Which fundamentally removes job security and systematically undermines the merit-based system, right? A system meticulously designed to ensure competence, professionalism, and impartiality in government.
It seems designed to do exactly that.
Such actions would, and are intended to, dismantle merit-based safeguards, and, if we consider the broader implications, effectively transform vital government agencies into instruments of the ruling clique. This jeopardizes not only effective oversight and competence, but also ultimately public safety, as decisions become politically motivated rather than based on expertise.
And there's a double benefit to this patronage, isn't there?
Yes, the dual potent benefit of this strategy is clear. It not only rewards loyalists with positions and financial benefits, but also, perhaps more subtly, blunts resistance by signaling that one's career survival depends on political fealty. This creates a powerful psychological impact within the bureaucracy, where the existential fear of job loss can, unfortunately, override professional duty and ethical obligations.
Okay, now for the third and often most brutal tactic, governing by fear. This is about using explicit intimidation, widespread purges, and selective repression to systematically paralyze opposition and ensure compliance. It's a much more overt and psychologically devastating tool in the autocratic playbook.
And for a stark, almost visceral example of this, we really have to look to Turkey under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, especially following the failed 2016 coup attempt.
Right, the coup attempt was pivotal.
Absolutely. Erdogan's response was immediate, comprehensive, and, frankly, devastating. He declared a state of emergency and unleashed an extraordinary purge that swept across all Turkish institutions. Over the subsequent years, tens of thousands of public servants were expelled or arrested.
Tens of thousands?
Yes, and this wasn't confined to soldiers directly involved in the coup. It extended broadly to civil administrators, police, judges, prosecutors, academics, school teachers, and more. Using emergency decrees, his regime summarily dismissed thousands of professors and teachers and even canceled their passports, often accusing them without evidence of abetting terrorism.
Thousands of academics, that's just an astonishing number and terrifying in its systematic scope. What kind of impact did that have specifically on academia?
Well, over 5,800 academics alone were fired from public universities. Many endured the added cruelty of having their passports canceled and their careers destroyed, effectively barring them from employment or leaving the country, essentially trapped and silenced. The message was undeniably clear and chilling. Any intellectual dissent, any critical inquiry would be met with severe and life-altering consequences. Beyond academia, critical media outlets were shuttered or cowed, effectively eliminating independent voices in the public sphere. Opposition politicians, too, faced arrests or legal bans, curtailing their ability to function. This comprehensive climate of fear effectively silenced much of Turkey's civil society and systematically cleared out independent voices in state institutions.
While Turkey presents a stark, almost theatrical example of overt repression, we also see subtler, though equally effective, forms of intimidation playing out in other contexts, including potentially in the U.S. under Trumpism, right, where maybe it's not mass jailing, but something else.
Exactly. Here, rather than mass jailing of opposition, the approach has often worked by harassing and marginalizing officials who won't toe the line.
Like the election officials.
Precisely. The targeting of this intimidation is noteworthy. Since 2020, there's been a reported surge in harassment, specifically directed at election administrators at the local level. These local election officers have been doxxed, threatened, or hit with relentless pressure to validate false fraud claims, undermining their ability to perform their duties impartially.
And the consequence?
It's been significant. Many seasoned officials, including long-standing Republicans, have resigned under this onslaught, leading to an unprecedented number of experienced election workers leaving their posts. And in their place, disturbingly, pro-Trump partisans or conspiracy theorists have sought to fill the void.
So it's a quiet, systemic replacement.
It is, replacing experienced nonpartisan officials with those loyal to a specific political agenda.
So it's a chilling message being sent to public servants at every level. Essentially, enforce loyalty or face consequences. Even within the federal government, President Trump demonstrated a clear, consistent penchant for retaliation and fear. We saw it in actions like firing inspectors general who reported executive misconduct, and his public vowing retribution against prosecutors investigating him.
Yeah, that creates an environment where the fear of reprisal can, and often does, override professional integrity, constitutional duty, and independent judgment. It's incredibly corrosive.
So when we consider the broader implications...
Well, by systematically replacing independent institutions with loyalists and punishing any individuals who prioritize duty over personal allegiance, an autocratic leader instills a pervasive climate of fear. And this fear extends far beyond government employees.
How so?
Private actors, like businesses, quickly learn to align with the regime to avoid losing lucrative contracts, licenses, or facing undue regulatory scrutiny. Similarly, media outlets, fearing closure or persecution, often self-censor or actively amplify propaganda to avoid becoming targets themselves.
So it ripples outwards.
It absolutely ripples outwards. In sum, rule manipulation, the strategic establishment of patronage networks, and fear-based control are not isolated tactics. They work together in a synergistic fashion to entrench an incumbent regime. Once these intertwined mechanisms take firm hold, a country can swiftly slide into what scholars precisely define as competitive authoritarianism, a system that, while still holding elections and maintaining a superficial veneer of democracy, does so under profoundly unfair conditions that systematically favor one side.
It's a deeply sophisticated and indeed chilling strategy in its methodical erosion of democratic principles.
The autocrat's toolkit.
Okay, let's recap that toolkit. We've now dissected the three core tactics of entrenchment. First, rewriting rules, which lends that veneer of legalism to power grabs.
Making it look legit.
Exactly. Second, institutional capture through patronage, effectively stacking loyalists in key positions.
Filling the ranks.
And third, governing by fear, using intimidation and purges to silence dissent. And crucially, these aren't independent tools, right? They're interconnected mechanisms that reinforce each other.
They work together.
Creating a system where elections might persist but are fundamentally unfair, moving a nation into that state of competitive authoritarianism.
Let's now turn to a textbook case, a real-world example of how these meticulously planned tactics combine into a full, devastating capture sequence. Hungary provides a truly stark, almost clinical illustration of how a democracy, once seemingly robust, can be methodically hollowed out and captured by an elected autocracy over a relatively short period.
And what's truly striking here, offering a profound cautionary tale, is the starting point. When Viktor Orban's Fidesz party secured that supermajority back in 2010, Hungary was, by all accounts and international metrics, a functioning liberal democracy and EU member.
Right, he was seen as a success story post-Cold War.
Exactly. This context is absolutely crucial because it highlights the dramatic, calculated, and deliberate transformation that followed, making it an exceptionally powerful and relevant case study for understanding democratic backsliding anywhere.
And Orban, demonstrating a remarkable strategic intent, didn't waste any time, did he?
Not at all. He immediately set about systematically removing the established guardrails of Hungarian democracy. This process began with a major sweeping constitutional and legal overhaul.
Right away.
Right away. His government swiftly rammed through constitutional changes and enacted a series of cardinal laws explicitly and meticulously designed to rewrite the rules in Fidesz's favor. We witnessed this with the adoption of a new constitution in 2011 and a subsequent electoral law that cunningly gerrymandered districts.
Redrawing the map.
Redrawing boundaries to disadvantage the opposition, and simultaneously lowered the quorum needed for electoral victory, making it easier for Fidesz to secure disproportionate power. The impact was clear and immediate. Orban decisively tilted the electoral playing field so heavily and systematically toward his party, rendering it profoundly difficult for any opposition to genuinely compete on a level playing field.
And at the same time, he centralized power.
Simultaneously with the electoral manipulation, his government actively centralized power in the executive, systematically stripping independent agencies of their traditional authority and autonomy. This action concentrated decision-making overwhelmingly in the hands of the executive branch, effectively dismantling critical checks and balances that had previously existed.
And then came the media.
Fidesz aggressively moved to take over the media landscape. Public broadcasters, ostensibly independent, were transformed into unequivocal government mouthpieces, endlessly churning out state-sanctioned propaganda. A carefully selected clique of pro-Orban oligarchs, closely aligned with the ruling party, systematically bought up private TV and newspapers, gaining control over previously independent outlets.
So both public and private media fell under control.
Pretty much. Furthermore, a new media council, meticulously staffed by Fidesz loyalists, was established to regulate content, thereby further tightening the government's grip on public information. By the late 2010s, the ruling party or its direct allies controlled the bulk of Hungary's news outlets, creating an impenetrable echo chamber that systematically demonized the opposition and endlessly trumpeted the government's preferred narrative, severely limiting pluralism in information.
And it wasn't just formal state institutions and media outlets. Civil society itself, those vital watchdogs and independent voices essential to a healthy democracy, also came under direct and intense attack, right?
Absolutely. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, particularly those critical of Orban's government, or receiving foreign funding, faced immense pressure. His administration passed a notorious Stop Soros law.
I remember that.
Specifically vilifying foreign-funded NGOs and often smeared human rights groups as foreign agents. This tactic was designed to effectively isolate, discredit, and demonize critical voices, making it exceedingly difficult for them to operate freely and maintain public trust.
But maybe the most critical step, the truly devastating one in this sequence, was capturing the judiciary.
Yes, perhaps the most crucial and devastating step in this systematic capture sequence was the deliberate capture of the judiciary. Fidesz expanded the size of the Constitutional Court and packed it with party allies, thereby diluting the influence of existing independent judges and ensuring a loyal majority.
Packing the court.
Exactly. Even more alarmingly, judges who were perceived as obstacles to the government's agenda were forced into early retirement. A key mechanism employed for this was a sudden strategic change to the retirement age for judges, which was suddenly lowered in 2011, allowing the regime to dismiss experienced judges and immediately install even more loyalists in their place.
So they just got rid of the ones they didn't like.
Effectively, yes. The consequence was profound and immediate. The courts, once a proud and independent check on executive power, became little more than rubber stamps for Fidesz policies.
That's truly remarkable in its audacity. So these courts, which should have been impartial arbiters of justice and defenders of the Constitution, were effectively transformed into mere tools of the ruling party. Can you give us some specific illustrative examples of the kinds of illiberal measures they then upheld?
Absolutely. They upheld measures ranging from the highly controversial criminalizing help to migrants, a move that drew international condemnation, to the expulsion of a prominent academic institution, expelling a prominent university, the Central European University, from the country, thereby curtailing academic freedom. By systematically controlling the apex court, Orbán effectively insulated his regime from legal challenge, thereby removing one of the most powerful and critical safeguards against executive overreach and potential abuses of power.
It sounds like by 2019, Orbán had simply dropped any pretense of respecting democratic institutions. He had spent nearly a decade meticulously stacking the deck, consolidating power through legislation and loyalist appointments. Now, with the judiciary firmly in his grasp, he pushed into new, even more pervasive areas of societal control.
That's right. His government asserted dominion over education, for example, forcing out independent university boards and replacing them with loyalists, thus controlling academic curricula and appointments. They also extended control over culture and the arts, using funding leverage and loyalist appointments to shape narratives and stifle independent artistic expression.
And even the private sector.
And perhaps most disturbingly, they reached deeply into the private sector, using regulatory favoritism and state contracts to empower friendly oligarchs, demonstrating an almost total societal and economic reach. It became pervasive.
And then came the final chilling step, cementing his rule. In 2020, under the pretext of the global COVID-19 pandemic,
A convenient pretext.
Orbán's Fidesz-controlled parliament passed an emergency law that granted the government the power to rule by decree indefinitely.
Indefinitely. And the crucial detail here, a true hallmark of authoritarian creep, is the explicit phrase, with no sunset clause. This effectively gave Orbán unlimited power without further parliamentary oversight, systematically cementing his authoritarian rule under the guise of crisis management.
The assessment of this decline from external independent observers is stark and unambiguous. Freedom House, a leading democracy watchdog, for instance, noted that Hungary's democratic decline was the most precipitous ever tracked in Europe.
The most precipitous ever tracked. That's stunning.
It really is. It underwent a profound transformation, evolving from one of the region's most promising post-Cold War success stories into the first EU member state classified as non-democratic, a truly unprecedented and alarming classification for a member of the European Union.
So, to connect this to the bigger picture, Orbán's meticulously executed capture sequence systematically choked off pluralism within Hungarian society in a mere decade. Elections still technically occur in Hungary, maintaining the veneer of competitive authoritarianism, but they are not free or fair by any stretch of the imagination.
Not genuinely competitive.
Not at all. The opposition faces a massively biased media environment, a tilted legal framework, and often harassment or financial pressure, making genuine effective competition nearly impossible. Orbán justifies his permanent rule with a potent blend of nationalist and illiberal democracy rhetoric, disingenuously claiming to represent the true, unified will of the Hungarian people against perceived external and internal liberal threats.
Under reality.
But the stark reality is a one-party dominant state, where the peaceful alternation of power, a cornerstone of democracy, has become virtually impossible. Hungary starkly demonstrates how, through relentless rule changes, systematic patronage, and pervasive repression, an elected leader can lock in durable entrenchment that effectively outlasts any single election cycle, creating a seemingly permanent political monopoly.
It's a truly sobering thought, a blueprint for democratic erosion. Hungary's experience has even coined a dark joke among political analysts, which serves as a profound warning for others. Hungary is the future. It shows what can happen if America or other democracies follow the same path.
Chilling.
This isn't just a distant political science case study. It's a live, chilling demonstration of what can unfold when democratic guardrails are systematically dismantled.
Hungary's descent.
Okay, let's quickly recap Hungary. We've just explored it as a textbook case of democratic entrenchment.
Absolutely. Here are the key takeaways from Hungary's capture sequence, sort of a flashcard list. First, systematic constitutional overhaul. Orbán used his supermajority to rewrite election laws and gerrymander districts, tilting the playing field right from the start.
Okay.
Second, centralization of power. Authority was stripped from independent agencies and concentrated heavily in the executive.
Hourglass.
Third, media monopolization. Public and private media were taken over by loyalists, creating that powerful information echo chamber.
Controlling the narrative.
Fourth, judicial capture. The Constitutional Court was packed with allies, judges forced out, rendering the judiciary essentially a rubber stamp.
Neutralizing checks.
Fifth, civil society suppression. NGOs and critical voices were attacked and smeared. Remember the Stock Soros law?
Silencing dissent.
Sixth, permanent rule by decree. That 2020 emergency law, crucially with no sunset clause, gave Orbán unlimited power.
The final nail.
Arguably. And the outcome. Hungary became the first EU member classified as non-democratic, demonstrating just how quickly a liberal democracy can be hollowed out from within.
A stark warning indeed. Hashtag Turkey's purge and permanent emergency. Okay, so if Hungary gives us the comprehensive blueprint for methodical, almost legalistic capture, Turkey, under Recep Tayyip Erdogan, offers another stark illustration. This one particularly focuses on the raw, pervasive fear factor as a primary engine of authoritarian entrenchment.
Right. The emphasis shifts slightly here. Even before 2016, Turkey was already experiencing significant democratic erosion in the 2010s under Erdogan's ruling AKP party, characterized by incremental crackdowns on press and opposition. But then a truly pivotal and dramatic event occurred that massively accelerated this decline.
The coup attempt.
The undeniable turning point was the July 2016 coup attempt. Its effect was immediate and profoundly transformative, shifting a process of gradual democratic erosion into outright autocratic consolidation. After surviving the failed coup, Erdogan swiftly declared a state of emergency and unleashed an extraordinary purge that swept with terrifying speed and scale across all Turkish institutions.
And this purge, as you described it, was truly sweeping in its scope, wasn't it? Can you detail its full scale and its immediate impact again? It's worth emphasizing.
It really is. Over the subsequent several years, tens of thousands of public servants were expelled or arrested. And again, it wasn't merely limited to soldiers directly implicated in the coup. It extended broadly and frankly indiscriminately to civil administrators, police, judges, prosecutors, academics, school teachers, and more, effectively targeting any perceived dissent or disloyalty, however remote.
Anyone not aligned.
Pretty much. The government summarily dismissed thousands of professors and teachers from their posts and, with alarming vindictiveness, even canceled their passports, thereby preventing them from leaving the country or pursuing careers abroad. Many were accused, often without evidence, of abetting terrorism. A particularly poignant and chilling example is the university staff who had signed a 2016 peace petition. They were branded traitors, and by emergency decree, over 5,800 academics lost their positions at public universities.
5,800 academics. Just gone.
Just gone. This, when viewed in its broader context, fundamentally devastated Turkey's academic freedom and sent an unequivocal, brutal signal that dissenting views in education and intellectual life would simply not be tolerated.
That's an astonishing and truly terrifying scale of suppression, extending deep into the intellectual fabric of society. What about the judiciary? That's supposed to be an independent check on executive power, a final bulwark against authoritarianism. How is it affected in Turkey?
A similar, equally devastating purge unfolded within the judiciary. A staggering one-third of all judges and prosecutors were removed from their positions based on alleged links to the exiled cleric Fethullah Gulen, whom Erdogan consistently blamed for orchestrating the coup.
One-third. That's huge.
Immense. Many were detained, and countless others were forced to flee the country in fear. This systemic and unprecedented removal of independent judicial figures allowed the AKP to swiftly refill judicial ranks with loyalists, thereby effectively eroding judicial independence to the core and transforming the courts into instruments of the executive branch, much as we observe in Hungary, but perhaps even more brutally and swiftly.
And the media, which was already under significant pressure before the coup attempt,
faced nothing less than a total onslaught. Using these newly acquired emergency powers, Erdogan's regime closed down over 100 media outlets that were deemed Gulenist or opposition-aligned. Journalists were jailed in droves, transforming Turkey into, disturbingly, one of the world's top jailers of journalists.
a grim distinction.
Indeed. Even major independent newspapers were strategically bought up by government-friendly businesses or coerced into towing the official line through various pressures. Any remaining critics within the press were chilled into silence by expansive new laws. For example, Turkey's Penal Code Article 301 makes insulting Turkishness a crime, a highly elastic and vaguely defined tool that Erdogan has cynically weaponized to prosecute writers and activists who dare to challenge his narrative or criticize state policies.
So the sheer scale and speed of this created that climate of fear.
What becomes profoundly apparent here is that the sheer scale and speed of Erdogan's purge created an omnipresent and pervasive climate of fear throughout Turkish society. People with even tenuous or imagined opposition links lost jobs and livelihoods. Countless individuals moderated their behavior or went silent to avoid becoming the next target of the regime. This deeply entrenched fear became a powerful, self-enforcing mechanism of social control.
And at the same time, they solidified control over the security forces.
Simultaneously, the entire security apparatus, comprising the police, intelligence services, and military, was meticulously restaffed with loyalists, ensuring that the very instruments of coercion and state power were under firm, politically aligned control. The AKP also strategically leveraged its new dominance to transition Turkey from a parliamentary system to an executive presidency, a fundamental structural change achieved via a 2017 referendum.
Ah, the constitutional change.
Yes. That constitutional alteration further concentrated power in Erdogan's hands, solidifying his personal authority and virtually eliminating any remaining formal checks.
So since that pivotal year of 2016, Turkey has effectively been in a state of permanent emergency. Erdogan, of course, consistently justifies his sweeping powers as absolutely necessary for stability and national security, frequently pointing to perceived threats like Kurdish insurgents or the 2016 putschists. But what's the true underlying reality behind this pervasive justification?
Well, in reality, this permanent purge mode has primarily served a singular overarching purpose: to systematically eliminate any centers of independent power that could potentially challenge him. Today, opposition politicians in Turkey operate under the constant threat of being banned from politics or summarily jailed, a chilling reality exemplified by the imprisonment of the popular Istanbul mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu on dubious and politically motivated charges.
Right, I remember that case.
Civil society organizations and NGOs are either tightly leashed by stringent regulations or shuttered outright if they dare to become too vocal or critical. Even with regular elections technically occurring, they are conducted under conditions of overwhelming media dominance, pervasive intimidation, and extensive legal repression, rendering them heavily imbalanced and fundamentally unfair. Erdogan, for instance, narrowly secured re-election in 2023 despite a seemingly united opposition.
Despite the economy, too, right?
Exactly, despite significant economic headwinds. A victory heavily aided by his deeply entrenched advantages and overwhelming control over state resources and the electoral narrative.
So the lesson from Turkey's post-2016 trajectory is stark and unambiguous. It vividly demonstrates how an autocrat can strategically use a crisis to accelerate capture, transforming a period of vulnerability into an opportunity for absolute consolidation of power.
Precisely. In a remarkably short span, Erdogan wiped out the liberal remnants of the Turkish state and aggressively realigned it under his personal authority. The cost of this perceived stability is immense and deeply detrimental. Democratic freedoms have plummeted, societal polarization is intense and entrenched, and Turkey's vital institutions, from its courts to its universities, have lost credibility both at home and on the international stage.
Yet, perhaps the most sobering aspect is that Erdogan's authoritarian grip endures.
It does, proving that once an authoritarian purge succeeds, it can sustain a regime even through significant economic troubles or sustained external criticism. This raises a critical overarching question for other democracies. When watchdogs, independent institutions, and political opposition are systematically crushed, it may tragically take decades and potentially a profound societal upheaval to rebuild what was irrevocably lost.
The message for other democracies is clear and urgent then.
Extremely clear. The path to recovery from this level of entrenchment is incredibly long, arduous, and fraught with immense difficulty.
Turkey's transformation.
All right, let's recap the key points from Turkey's slide, focusing on that fear factor.
Okay, the flashcard version for Turkey. First, crisis exploitation. The 2016 coup attempt was absolutely used as a pretext for that widespread, brutal purge across all state institutions.
Point.
Second, mass purges. Tens of thousands of public servants, including academics and judges, were summarily dismissed and persecuted. Just enormous numbers.
The scale was immense.
Third, judicial subversion. A third of judges and prosecutors removed, allowing loyalists to completely erode judicial independence.
Courts compromised.
Fourth, media annihilation. Over 100 outlets closed, journalists jailed, critical media co-opted or silenced. Total onslaught.
Information blackout.
Fifth, pervasive fear. The sheer scale and speed of the purges created that self-enforcing climate of fear that paralyzed dissent across society.
Fear as a tool.
Sixth, executive consolidation. The shift to an executive presidency further concentrated power directly in Erdogan's hands.
Structural change.
And the outcome? Turkey remains effectively in a permanent emergency, with elections conducted under conditions of severe imbalance. It demonstrates that a successful purge can sustain a regime even amidst significant challenges.
A truly grim picture of accelerated capture. Okay, so after the sobering and frankly chilling accounts of Hungary and Turkey, this raises a crucial, hopeful question that truly hangs in the air for those tracking global democracy. Is it genuinely possible to reverse competitive authoritarianism once it has begun to set in?
It's the question we need to ask, right? And history, thankfully, does offer some encouraging examples, though often partial and hard-won victories, it must be said.
Partial and hard-won, okay.
Yes, and these cases are absolutely vital for understanding potential exit strategies from democratic backsliding. Two contemporary or near-contemporary cases, Slovakia and Brazil, powerfully illustrate how broad coalitions and resilient institutional choke points can at least arrest a democratic decline, even if only temporarily.
Arresting decline, even temporarily, that's important.
It suggests that while the struggle against entrenchment is immense, the outcome is far from predetermined. Agency and concerted effort can indeed shift the trajectory.
Okay, let's begin with Slovakia in the 1990s. A truly fascinating case, as you say, of a country that teetered on the brink of autocracy and then, remarkably, managed to pull back from the precipice.
Yeah, it's a classic case study. After the initial euphoria following the fall of communism, Slovakia notably struggled with illiberal rule under Vladimir Mečiar from 1993 to 1998. His government was explicitly described by analysts as a competitive authoritarian regime.
That term again?
Exactly. Elections technically did occur, but democratic checks and balances were consistently weakened, and state resources were systematically abused to his personal and political advantage.
So what was the catalyst for change there?
What's particularly compelling here is the precise catalyst. Slovakia was facing rampant rising corruption internally and a very real, tangible threat of international isolation externally. Specifically, there was a clear danger of being deliberately left out of the crucial NATO and EU expansion processes due to Mečiar's increasingly authoritarian bent and his disregard for democratic norms.
Oh, the external pressure.
That significant external pressure, combined with growing internal discontent, provided a powerful and undeniable incentive for decisive internal action. And the Slovak opposition responded to this existential threat by forging an extraordinary alliance.
How extraordinary.
In the lead-up to the 1998 elections, nearly the entire spectrum of opposition parties spanning from center-right conservatives to center-left liberals and even ethnic minority parties remarkably united behind a singular overriding goal: to oust Mečiar to save Slovak democracy.
Wow, that sounds like a truly diverse, even inherently unlikely coalition given the usual ideological divides. And civil society, beyond just political parties, also played a massive, indispensable role, didn't it?
Absolutely indispensable. More than 100 NGOs formed the Civic Campaign 98, OK 98, a truly nonpartisan grassroots movement designed with a clear purpose: to vigorously encourage voter turnout, meticulously train election monitors to prevent fraud, and proactively prepare citizens to protest peacefully if any vote rigging or attempts to cling to power occurred.
Getting organized.
Very organized. This broad, unified coalition strategically and effectively framed the upcoming election as a clear binary choice between Europe versus isolation, thereby casting Mečiar's personalist abusive rule as a direct and immediate obstacle to Slovakia's future and its desired integration with the West. This reframing elevated the stakes beyond mere partisan politics.
So given such a unified and strategic effort, what was the actual outcome of the 1998 elections? Did this comprehensive strategy successfully work?
The strategy worked remarkably well, exceeding many expectations. Despite significant hurdles, including pervasive state media bias and other efforts to disadvantage the opposition, voter turnout surged dramatically, signaling a clear popular will.
People showed up.
They did. As a result, Mečiar's party was decisively voted out of office. The opposition's unified front proved absolutely critical, preventing the vote splitting that could have inadvertently kept Mečiar in power despite his dwindling support. Furthermore, their post-election vigilance, a testament to their foresight, was key in deterring Mečiar from attempting to cling to power through extra-legal or unconstitutional means.
So they held firm after the vote, too.
They did. This led to Slovakia's democratic forces achieving a peaceful transfer of power in 1998, an event that was widely heralded internationally as a model case of democratic rescue and resilience. The new government promptly and decisively reoriented the country toward the West, and Slovakia went on to join NATO and the EU by the mid-2000s, a tangible strategic reward for its courageous democratic turnaround and commitment to Western values.
This truly was a classic cross-cleavage coalition victory, wasn't it? Where liberals, conservatives, nationalists, and minorities all put aside differences to restore democracy. And it powerfully highlights the importance of those institutional choke points you mentioned earlier.
Indeed, the presence of strong institutional choke points, like the Electoral Commission, which was critically buttressed by the watchful eyes of international observers, and the implicit, powerful leverage of EU membership conditions, helped ensure the election was carried out and counted fairly.
Those checks mattered.
They absolutely mattered.
Yeah.
This case demonstrates a crucial principle, that even entrenched authoritarians can be removed via elections if the opposition is genuinely united, presents a clear alternative, and if the democratic institutions, however strained, retain enough functionality to serve as vital safeguards. Once Mečiar unequivocally lost, he accepted defeat under immense internal and external pressure.
But this isn't necessarily a perfect fairy tale ending, is it? The fight for democracy is rarely a one-time victory.
It's not, and that's a crucial caveat. Slovakia's story didn't definitively conclude in 1998. The country later experienced new, concerning episodes of backsliding under another populist leader, Robert Fico.
Ah, Fico. Right.
And tellingly, once again, mass protests and cross-party coalitions were needed to course-correct, such as after the shocking murder of a journalist in 2018. This underscores the profound truth that democracy is an ongoing struggle, a continuous process of vigilance and reaffirmation, not a one-time permanent victory.
Constant effort needed.
Constant effort. Slovakia's democracy remains contested, but the 1998 episode stands as enduring proof that exit strategies exist even in dire situations, offering a roadmap for future challenges.
Okay, now let's pivot to a more contemporary example, Brazil, which also provides a powerful lesson in democratic resilience. Under right-wing populist President Jair Bolsonaro from 2019 to 2022, Brazil experienced significant and concerning democratic backsliding.
Yeah, that was watched very closely globally.
Bolsonaro openly attacked the press, systematically sowed distrust in electoral processes, empowered the military in political affairs, and aggressively intimidated opponents, even going so far as to muse publicly that he might not accept an electoral defeat if it occurred. By 2022, many genuine fears were circulating that Brazil's democracy was truly existentially on the line.
This was indeed a critical juncture for Brazilian democracy. In that year's presidential election, facing Bolsonaro's authoritarian tendencies, a broad left-right coalition of democratic forces decisively rallied to defeat Bolsonaro at the ballot box.
Another broad coalition.
Exactly. What's particularly insightful here is the strategic alliance building undertaken by the opposition. Former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, a long-standing leftist icon, meticulously built an alliance that extended far beyond his traditional Workers' Party base to include centrists, and even some conservatives who had become deeply disaffected with Bolsonaro's anti-democratic rhetoric and actions.
Reaching across the aisle.
Significantly, Lula made a very deliberate and strategic choice, selecting a center-right running mate and actively cultivating and gaining endorsements from rivals, signaling very clearly that the race was fundamentally about saving democracy itself, transcending purely ideological or partisan concerns.
And despite a hard-fought and deeply polarized campaign that truly tested the nation, Brazil's institutions remarkably held firm. This resilience is absolutely critical to understanding the democratic comeback.
Indeed. The judiciary, particularly the Supreme Electoral Court, stood firm against Bolsonaro's relentless and false fraud claims, actively defending the integrity of the voting process. Critically, the armed forces, despite Bolsonaro's repeated and unsettling hints at intervention to support his claims,
Which is worrying.
very worrying, they remained in barracks, resisting political pressure to interfere with the democratic process. International observers also played a vital role, lending crucial credibility and transparency to the electoral process. In October 2022, Lula narrowly defeated Bolsonaro in a free and fair runoff election.
It was close.
Very close. And despite Bolsonaro's inflammatory rhetoric and the subsequent attempts by his most fervent supporters to overturn the result, echoing, disturbingly, the U.S. January 6th events, when thousands of pro-Bolsonaro radicals violently stormed government buildings in Brasilia on January 8th, 2023.
Yeah, that was shocking to see.
The Brazilian security forces eventually cleared the rioters and successfully asserted control.
So critically, the system held, and the constitutional transfer of power went forward despite the attempts to disrupt it.
Yes, and importantly, calls by some Bolsonaro allies for a military coup were rebuffed. The military and other key institutions steadfastly refused to disrupt the transition of power, upholding their constitutional duty. Vice President Lula was duly inaugurated as president, and Bolsonaro, facing accumulating legal troubles, went into self-imposed exile in Florida. Brazil thus managed a remarkable democratic reset. The incumbent autocrat was successfully removed through institutional means and a broad, unified societal front. This unequivocally counts as a significant reversal of democratic backsliding. Freedom House, for instance, noted that Brazil's free election and peaceful transfer of power in 2022 represented an important and heartening democratic correction on the global stage.
And there was even significant judicial accountability for Bolsonaro himself, which is a powerful signal of institutional strength and adherence to the rule of law.
Precisely. In mid-2023, Brazil's judiciary took the notable and decisive step of disqualifying Bolsonaro from running for office until 2030, specifically due to his persistent attacks on the electoral system.
Banning him from running.
Yes, this judicial accountability for a would-be strongman holding him responsible for undermining democratic processes is a very positive and encouraging sign that some rule of law choke points are still alive, active, and functioning effectively in Brazil. However, it's also a crucial caution that such victories are often partial and require ongoing vigilance.
Still fragile.
Very much so. The country remains heavily polarized, Bolsonaro's movement still commands fervent support, and his allies remain active in Congress and other influential offices. The societal rifts and the pervasive disinformation that Bolsonaro so effectively exploited have not magically vanished. In essence, Brazil stepped back from the immediate edge, but the arduous labor of democratic reconstruction and healing continues.
Still, the 2022 episode undeniably underscores a key point. Democratic reversals are possible when diverse actors unite in defense of core constitutional norms. The Brazilian coalition, as you described, was incredibly broad and diverse, wasn't it?
It was indeed a triumph of broad coalition building. Brazilian democracy benefited profoundly from a coalition that included not just Lula's traditional leftist base, but also center-right figures, influential business leaders, evangelical pastors, respected jurists, and dedicated grassroots activists, an extraordinarily diverse array of constituencies that fundamentally agreed on the imperative of free elections and the unwavering rule of law.
A real cross-section.
A real cross-section. It also benefited immensely from institutions that, albeit strained by the political pressures, did not completely break. Judges bravely stood up to executive intimidation, and military leaders, to their credit, resisted calls to disrupt the transition of power. Together, these multifaceted factors created a crucial opening for democracy to rebound and reassert itself.
So what's the overarching lesson we can distill from these compelling cases of partial democratic reversals in Slovakia and Brazil.
To connect this to the bigger picture, in both Slovakia and Brazil, we observe a consistent and powerful pattern that exit strategies from competitive authoritarianism invariably involve broad, cross-cutting coalitions combined with resilient institutions.
Coalitions plus institutions.
Exactly. Authoritarian regimes, by their very design, attempt to divide and co-opt their opposition. The effective antidote is an opposition that consciously and strategically bridges social and ideological divides in the name of democracy itself, recognizing the existential threat. Likewise, authoritarians aim to capture all institutional levers of power. The effective antidote is when some institutions, be it an independent election commission, a respected court, or a functioning legislature, retain enough independence to act as a choke point against power grabs.
Those crucial choke points again.
They're critical. Now, neither case represents a perfect fairy tale ending. Slovakia's democratic gains were later partly reversed by new populists, and Brazil's democratic repair is ongoing and remains fragile. But these cases unequivocally prove that entrenchment need not be permanent. With strategic unity and sustained persistence, democracies can indeed regenerate themselves even after experiencing serious backsliding. This offers profound hope and a clear operational framework.
Paths of return.
Okay, another quick recap. We've just seen how Slovakia and Brazil offered crucial lessons in actually reversing democratic backsliding, even if partially.
Yes, some key insights from these democratic comebacks, flashcard style again. First, broad coalitions are essential. Diverse political and societal groups united specifically to defeat entrenched leaders, Mečiar in Slovakia, Bolsonaro in Brazil. Unity across divides.
Got it.
Second, institutional choke points. Independent electoral commissions and judiciaries stood firm against manipulation and false claims. Institutions mattered.
Critical.
Third, external pressure and incentives. International alignment, like the EU-NATO prospect for Slovakia, provided crucial leverage.
Outside factors helped.
Fourth, civil society mobilization. Grassroots movements played a vital role in voter turnout monitoring and vigilance, people power. Fifth, strategic framing. Elections were framed as fundamental choices between democracy and autocracy, which helped transcend normal partisan divides.
Raising the stakes.
Sixth, partial, not perfect. These reversals are hard-won and require ongoing vigilance, as new backsliding attempts can, and often do, occur.
No guarantees.
And finally, the core message. Entrenchment is not necessarily permanent. Democratic regeneration is possible through strategic unity and institutional resilience.
Hopeful, but requires work.
Okay, so after bisecting the mechanisms of entrenchment and the possibilities of reversal, the burning central question now becomes, how can a democracy proactively protect itself from sliding into authoritarian entrenchment? Or, just as critically, how can it recover if it has already begun to backslide?
Right, moving from diagnosis to prescription.
Exactly.
Sure.
Comparative research and invaluable on-the-ground lessons from around the world converge to point to several key strategies in what we could effectively call a pro-democracy playbook.
And this is where we transition from deep analysis to highly actionable insights, providing a framework for democratic resilience. The first strategy, and it is truly a foundational one, is to insulate the civil service and security forces from politicization.
Why is that so fundamental? Because a professional, merit-based civil service is not merely a bureaucratic ideal. It is, in fact, a vital line of defense against authoritarian capture. Its impartiality ensures that the government can continue to function based on expertise and public interest, rather than partisan loyalty.
That makes perfect logical sense. If the people responsible for the day-to-day operations of government are beholden to an individual leader rather than to the Constitution or the broader public good, then the entire system is already fundamentally compromised. The machinery of state becomes a tool of power, not governance.
Exactly. Therefore, democracies must proactively and vigorously resist attempts to purge or replace career officials with political loyalists, end quote. In the U.S. context, for instance, proposals like Schedule F, which would unilaterally allow a U.S. president to fire tens of thousands of federal employees at will, circumventing established civil service protections, are widely and correctly seen by experts as a direct existential threat to neutral governance.
That Schedule F is a big one.
It really is. preserving existing laws and reinforcing norms that meticulously protect public servants from arbitrary removal, and that ensure hiring is consistently based on expertise and merit rather than patronage, actively helps prevent the insidious formation of a partisan deep state doing a leader's bidding.
And it's not just the civilian civil service, but the military and law enforcement as well, isn't it? Their nonpartisanship seems equally, if not more, critical given their capacity for coercion.
Precisely. Keeping the military and law enforcement nonpartisan is equally, if not more, crucial. When these powerful security organs become politicized, they can be weaponized to persecute opponents or to defy election results, thereby transforming them into instruments of oppression and political control rather than impartial upholders of law and order.
So what are the safeguards?
Specific measures like strong whistleblower protections, empowering independent inspectors general within agencies, and robust legislative oversight of all security-related agencies all act as essential multi-layered safeguards. In practical terms, defending the civil service might necessitate mobilizing public opinion and employee unions against politicization efforts, and crucially, quickly reversing any such efforts that do occur, as President Biden did by promptly rescinding Trump's initial Schedule F order upon taking office.
Public pushback matters.
Immensely. As one union leader cogently warned amid talks of purges, destroying the nonpartisan civil service would gut the government's ability to serve the public impartially, making its prevention an absolute top priority for any democracy.
Okay, the second strategy in our playbook. Defend independent courts and prosecutors, thereby upholding the bedrock principle of the rule of law. We've seen with vivid clarity in Hungary and Turkey how authoritarians almost invariably attempt to first capture the judiciary or intimidate law enforcement into selectively shielding the regime from accountability.
It's a classic move. To counter this fundamental autocratic tactic, democracies can proactively enact special protections for the judiciary and key justice officials. For instance, implementing transparent, merit-based judicial appointments procedures and ensuring robust tenure security for judges makes it significantly harder for any single political faction to unilaterally stack the courts with loyalists who prioritize political allegiance over legal impartiality.
So build protections into the system itself.
Exactly. In the U.S. context, this could involve considering federal laws to limit the ability of a president to fire U.S. attorneys or FBI directors without cause, or to require Senate confirmation for certain sensitive posts, ensuring that wholesale Friday night massacres of investigative officials face substantial institutional hurdles and public scrutiny.
So it's about deliberately building in those institutional friction points and checks and balances that make it significantly harder to unilaterally dismantle the justice system and subvert its independence.
Exactly. And at the state level, bolstering independent election supervisors and attorneys general is similarly important. In a scenario where federal authorities might become compromised or captured, state officials genuinely committed to the rule of law can serve as a vital backstop, effectively stepping in and pursuing cases that a politicized federal DOJ might neglect or suppress.
The states as a firewall.
Potentially, yes. Moreover, independent anti-corruption bodies should always be empowered and vigorously protected rather than undermined or defunded. And the broader public and independent media also play a vital, active role. By vocally supporting prosecutors or judges who bravely uphold the law impartially in the face of pressure, they actively create political costs for any leader who would attempt to undermine or retaliate against those officials.
We've seen this kind of public and institutional pushback successfully play out in other countries, haven't we? Demonstrating its efficacy.
We absolutely have. In Slovakia, for instance, mass protests in 2018, sparked by the murder of a journalist investigating corruption, powerfully pressured the government to sack corrupt police officials and led to more independent investigators taking charge of high-profile cases, demonstrating public demand for accountability.
Right, the journalist's murder.
Yes. In Israel in 2023, enormous civic demonstrations successfully helped stall a government plan to neuter the Supreme Court, powerfully demonstrating that sustained popular pressure can indeed defend judicial independence and the separation of powers. The through line in all these successful efforts is that a democracy's fundamental laws and ingrained norms must unequivocally make loyalty to the Constitution, not the leader, the guiding and paramount principle for all public servants. Any attempt to punish just officials for simply doing their jobs impartially must be met with widespread public outrage and decisive institutional pushback.
Okay, now, perhaps the most critical and arguably the most challenging strategy: building broad, pro-rule of law coalitions. defenders of democracy must fundamentally transcend partisan and cultural divides to unite against authoritarian threats. This truly seems like the hardest, yet most absolutely necessary piece of the puzzle for any successful democratic defense.
It is, undeniably. This is because no single party or solitary social group can effectively stop an entrenched autocrat alone. It fundamentally requires a coalition as wide as the threat itself. This means consciously fostering alliances that might seem highly unlikely in normal political times, for example. Human rights liberals teaming up with business leaders, or labor unions forging alliances with pro-democracy conservatives, all singularly focused on the overriding common goal of preserving the constitutional order and democratic governance.
Unlikely bedfellows united for democracy.
Exactly. The diverse experiences of Slovakia, Brazil, and also Poland and Israel powerfully underscore this vital necessity.
Poland's 2023 election is a great, very recent example of such a broad coalition succeeding, isn't it?
Absolutely. In Poland, previously fractious opposition parties, despite their ideological differences, successfully formed a united front and skillfully leveraged strong civil society activism to finally oust the illiberal PS government after 8 years of rule that saw significant democratic backsliding.
That was a big moment.
It was. In Israel, people from across the entire political spectrum, including secular and religious, left and right, the tech sector, and even military reservists, found common cause in vociferously opposing the government's proposed judiciary overhaul, demonstrating the power of shared democratic concern over traditional divides. The United States, similarly, will undoubtedly need a robust pro-democracy coalition that actively includes principled conservatives and Republicans alongside moderates, progressives, and minority communities. A true cross-cleavage alliance that stands firmly and unequivocally for the rule of law over the dictates of any single individual or political party.
And these crucial coalitions can also benefit significantly from external support, correct? Both private sector and international.
Yes. Such coalitions also benefit immensely from coordinated support in the private sector and the international community. For instance, when businesses, civic groups, and foreign allies all strategically coordinate their efforts to defend democratic norms through public statements, boycotts, or targeted sanctions, it generates a powerful counterforce to would-be authoritarians, increasing the political and economic costs of their actions.
Making it costly to backslide.
Exactly. And this crucial coalition building can even extend into the authoritarian regime's presumed base, actively identifying and empowering those voters who, though they may lean authoritarian on some issues, still reject outright abuses of the system and violations of fundamental rights. Reaching them through carefully targeted messaging, especially to debunk pervasive disinformation, is key to undercutting an autocrat's claimed mandate and legitimacy.
So trying to peel off support.
Or at least neutralizing it. In short, unity is strength. Democracy's defenders must always remember they likely constitute a majority if they stand together. The more segments of society speak with a unified voice on core democratic principles, the harder it is for an authoritarian faction to play them off each other or disingenuously claim to represent the true people alone.
Okay, our fourth strategy in this crucial playbook: protecting the free press and ensuring fact-based discourse. We've seen in case after case how the cynical control of information is absolutely central to the authoritarian playbook. So, safeguarding independent media and fostering truth in the public sphere is vital, perhaps even paramount.
This is truly fundamental. It encompasses a wide range of actions, from actively supporting public interest journalism through various means, to aggressively fighting online disinformation and propaganda campaigns, and even reforming social media algorithms that can, unfortunately, amplify extremism and false narratives.
That Hungarian analyst had a warning about this, right?
Yes. András Biranargi warns from his country's painful experience. Once the government claims control over media, reversing the course becomes very difficult. With state-aligned media systematically dominating the information landscape, lies become the norm, and opposition voices are painted as enemies of the people, thereby destroying public trust and making informed democratic participation nearly impossible. Therefore, a robust pro-democracy strategy must absolutely include holding the line on press freedom and independent inquiry.
In the U.S. context, what does this critical imperative of holding the line look like specifically on a practical level?
Well, that could mean ensuring the legal framework strongly protects journalists and whistleblowers who expose misconduct, actively preventing abusive lawsuits, often referred to as SLAPP suits, strategic lawsuits against public participation designed to intimidate and financially drain critical media outlets, and vigorously encouraging a diverse, independent local news ecosystem that is less vulnerable to corporate or political takeover.
Supporting local news seems key there.
It's very important. Media literacy initiatives and robust civic education programs can also play a crucial role in inoculating the public against authoritarian alternative facts. Notably, influential tech platforms should be pressed through policy and public pressure to curb the rampant flood of disinformation that so often accompanies democratic breakdowns, a complex and challenging task, certainly.
Easier said than done.
But experiments are underway. From stronger content moderation of provable falsehoods to the strategic amplification of reliable news sources. The bottom line is that a democracy simply cannot function effectively if its citizens are trapped in information silos of conspiracy and propaganda, unable to discern truth. Therefore, reinforcing these information defenses through both proactive policy and widespread grassroots efforts is an absolutely key component of any comprehensive playbook to save a democracy from authoritarian capture.
Okay, finally, the fifth strategy, one that emphasizes timing and resolve, mobilizing early and peacefully to hold the line. Veteran democracy defenders consistently emphasize the critical importance of acting early, decisively, and nonviolently in direct response to initial authoritarian moves before they gain irreversible momentum.
This is a painful lesson learned from history, isn't it? In numerous countries that ultimately succumbed to dictatorship, opponents often realized too late that their democracy was being meticulously dismantled bit by bit through seemingly minor infractions that accumulated into systemic capture.
Death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly. To avoid that tragic fate, one must cultivate the ability to recognize the early warning signs, be it attacks on independent judges, the vilification of minority groups, or transparent attempts to undermine electoral processes, and respond immediately with robust, nonviolent civic action.
That quote from Maria Ressa comes to mind.
Yes, the Nobel laureate journalist Maria Ressa, reflecting on the authoritarian turn in her native Philippines and drawing stark parallels to the Urim experience, powerfully stated, "Every day that we do not act, we get weaker. It's not going to be easier to do it 6 months from now. It will be worse a year from now." This underscores the profound existential urgency of not procrastinating or normalizing each successive erosion of democratic norms.
So immediate, peaceful, and persistent action is absolutely key. Don't wait.
Precisely. Peaceful mass protests, relentless public pressure on legislators, and strategic court challenges are powerful tools that must be deployed before a backslide accelerates too far, making reversal exponentially more difficult. The recent inspiring ouster of the PS government in Poland, for instance, came after years of sustained street protests over judicial independence and women's rights. Those protests played a vital role in keeping the democratic opposition energized and vividly signaled to voters that core democratic values were fundamentally at stake.
So the groundwork matters.
Immensely. In the U.S. context, this means pro-democracy forces, including ordinary citizens, should be prepared to march, to litigate, and to engage in peaceful civil disobedience if necessary to block egregious power grabs or rights violations. It also means maintaining the moral high ground, consistently using the established tools of democracy, free speech, assembly, legal petitions, rather than resorting to violence.
Why is nonviolence so important strategically?
Well, nonviolent discipline is both ethically imperative and strategically intelligent. It avoids giving authoritarians a convenient pretext to crack down with force and often helps win over sympathetic neutrals who might otherwise be alienated. An excellent example is the mass demonstrations in Georgia, Eastern Europe, in 2023, where citizens peacefully protested a Russian-style anti-NGO law and remarkably succeeded in getting it withdrawn through sustained nonviolent action.
Holding the line.
Exactly. The mantra of effective activists ultimately is hold the line. Do not concede on the fundamental principles of democracy, even if it means sustained, arduous struggle. As one expert panelist concisely put it, if you give up rights now, reclaiming them later will be exponentially harder. Thus, continuous, active engagement voting in every election, contacting representatives, supporting watchdog organizations, is perpetually needed to prevent authoritarianism from taking firm root.
It's clear that all these strategies, far from being isolated, reinforce one another, creating a robust, multi-layered defense system for democracy.
Absolutely. A professional civil service can uphold the rule of law, independent courts can protect media freedom, broad coalitions lend decisive weight to protests and legal challenges, and so on. They all connect.
So the overall lesson.
To connect this to the bigger picture, the overall undeniable lesson is that democracy will not defend itself autonomously. People must actively and vigilantly defend it. As a Center for American Progress report bluntly noted, democratic institutions alone cannot withstand determined authoritarian actors. Opposition parties and civil society must act promptly, decisively, and proactively to defend democratic principles.
Institutions aren't enough on their own.
They're necessary, but not sufficient. In the United States, which undeniably remains a democracy but an embattled one, this may necessitate uncomfortable alliances and concerted action across party lines, a challenge to traditional political norms. But the fundamental stakes of preserving constitutional government absolutely justify it. The good news is that America still possesses considerable soft guardrails, a strong and active civil society, the dispersed power of federalism where states can serve as crucial bulwarks against federal overreach, and a political culture that, at least historically, has deeply generated the Constitution.
So there are strengths to leverage.
Definitely. These inherent strengths can and must be leveraged in a pro-democracy playbook. The critical challenge, however, is sustaining public attention and collective willpower before the country reaches a point of no return, where these safeguards become too weak to act. Acting early is key.
The pro-democracy playbook.
Okay, another crucial recap. We've just outlined a critical playbook for defending democracy against entrenchment.
Yeah, the 5 key strategies, flashcard style. 1. Insulate civil service and security forces. Protect nonpartisan, merit-based government functions from political loyalists. Think preventing Schedule F.
Keep it professional.
2. Defend independent courts and prosecutors. Implement transparent appointments, tenure security, support judicial independence against political pressure, rule of law.
Protect the refs.
3. Build broad pro-rule of law coalitions. Forge cross-ideological alliances united solely on defending democratic principles. Remember Slovakia, Brazil, Poland.
Unity in defense.
4. Protect free press and facts-based discourse. Support independent journalism, fight disinformation, resist media capture. Hungary's warning is stark here.
Truth matters.
5. Mobilize early and peacefully. Recognize warning signs and respond with immediate nonviolent civic action and sustained engagement. Rearrest's urgency. Hold the line.
Act now, act peacefully.
And the overall point. Democracy requires active defense by its citizens. Institutions alone are not enough.
A clear, if demanding, playbook. #tax stability or stagnation. The false promise of permanent power. Okay, let's talk about the justification we hear so often. It's truly fascinating how authoritarians consistently justify their moves with such reassuring, almost comforting rhetoric. They perpetually claim to be delivering stability, order, efficiency, and even a cleaner, less corrupt government, that enticing promise to drain the swamp permanently.
It's a very common and often effective narrative.
In a polarized United States, we can certainly hear clear echoes of this. The argument that a Trump-led strong executive would definitively end the gridlock and chaos, unequivocally restore law and order, and finally purge the entrenched elites once and for all, bringing about a new, stable political era.
And it's particularly striking how this narrative of stability resonates globally across diverse political landscapes. Similar justifications appear worldwide with remarkable consistency. Russia's Vladimir Putin, for example, famously defended scrapping constitutional term limits by asserting he needed to ensure Russia's long-term stability and prevent a dangerous power vacuum.
Right, stability as the reason.
Leaders like Hungary's Orbán and Turkey's Erdogan consistently tout the predictability and efficiency of one-party dominance, arguing that decisive governance, unfettered by the messy complexities of coalition politics or disruptive dissent, is essential for achieving long-term national development and greatness.
Getting things done, they claim.
Exactly. And it's true that in the short term, an authoritarian regime can indeed create a compelling illusion of stability. There's no noisy opposition in parliament, no disruptive changes in government every few years, and a unified state messaging system that projects an image of everything being perfectly under control.
But this purported stability, the one they promise, is ultimately a facade, isn't it? And a deeply dangerous one at that.
It is absolutely a facade, and its dangers are profound. In reality, durable entrenchment eliminates the single greatest safety valve of any democracy, the alternation in power.
That ability to vote the incumbents out.
Precisely. Regular alternation, the fundamental ability of voters to peacefully replace their leaders through free and fair elections, is precisely how democracies inherently correct their mistakes, provide a channel for ventilating public grievances, and continually renew their institutions and leadership. As democratic theorists meticulously note, democracy fundamentally relies on the possibility of alternation in power. When that possibility is systematically cut off, the political system fundamentally ceases to be genuinely accountable to the people it purports to serve.
And with that fundamental lack of accountability, it inevitably leads to pervasive corruption, doesn't it? Even if they promise to fight corruption.
Precisely. An entrenched ruling party, regardless of its initial popularity or stated intentions, will almost inevitably slide into widespread self-dealing and profound abuse of power. With no credible fear of losing the next election, leaders and their cronies have every incentive to hollow out checks and balances completely and systematically use the state apparatus to enrich themselves and their loyal cronies. While they may loudly tout anti-corruption efforts as a public justification, once immunity from prosecution is effectively assured, corruption often paradoxically soars in entrenched regimes. It just goes unpunished and unexamined.
Hungary again.
Hungary is a stark case in point. Orban's government, while vociferously talking about defending the nation from liberal decadence and external threats, concurrently oversaw massive graft and illicit enrichment via insider contracts, to the extent that the European Union has specifically cited Hungary for opaque and compromised procurement practices that disproportionately benefit the ruling elite and its inner circle.
So over time, this lack of genuine alternation in power doesn't produce true stability, but rather a rigid, brittle system. It's not stability, but a creeping stagnation.
What's particularly noteworthy here is the inherent rigidity that a lack of alternation generates. Dissent is systematically driven underground, discontent simmers uncontrollably among those excluded from the centers of power, and the regime's overall performance often deteriorates precisely because constructive criticism, independent oversight, and diverse perspectives are systematically muzzled.
No feedback loop.
Exactly. The perceived stability tends to be one of stagnation. Genuine innovation in policy or society is stifled if it is perceived as threatening the established status quo, inevitably leading to decay in governance, economic dynamism, and societal progress. In the U.S., for instance, a hypothetical scenario where one political faction permanently dominates would likely exacerbate the country's existing deep divides and policy paralysis in new and dangerous ways. As legitimacy inexorably erodes, the entrenched regime might resort to even more overt coercion and repression to maintain control, paradoxically breeding further instability rather than achieving true peace or order.
History, then, seems to have a pretty clear and consistent verdict on regimes that claim to install a permanent, stable order. It rarely ends that way, does it?
Indeed. History unequivocally shows that regimes claiming to install a permanent, stable order usually end up facing greater turmoil down the road, often with catastrophic consequences. Without a democratic safety valve, the peaceful mechanism of electoral change pressure simply builds until it violently explodes.
Like a pressure cooker.
Exactly like a pressure cooker. We can see this in examples like the Arab Spring, where seemingly unshakable autocrats in the Middle East long preached that their iron-fisted rule kept their countries stable, until decades of accumulated frustration and suppressed grievances finally led to popular uprisings that plunged several nations into profound chaos or protracted conflict.
Right.
Similarly, in the Soviet Union, the proclaimed stability of decades of one-party rule masked deep-seated inefficiencies, systemic corruption, and simmering resentments that, once finally unleashed, led to a tumultuous and often violent collapse. In modern autocracies, when change eventually comes, whether through a coup, revolution, or the leader's death, it is often highly destabilizing, precisely because normal, peaceful mechanisms of alternation were systematically suppressed or did not exist.
Whereas democracies have that release valve.
By stark contrast, democracies that experience regular alternation in power, even if contentious, tend not to have such violent ruptures because elections effectively act as a vital and necessary release valve for societal tensions.
And the longer this authoritarian entrenchment lasts, the harder it is to undo, right? It's not just a matter of changing leadership. It's about rebuilding the very fabric of society and its institutions from the ground up.
This raises a critical and chilling implication. The longer an authoritarian entrenchment endures, the exponentially harder it becomes to undo. Every additional year that a regime spends systematically rewriting laws, indoctrinating public opinion through propaganda, and sidelining any viable opposition only increases the myriad obstacles to reversal.
So time is of the essence.
Absolutely. If, for instance, a political figure were to serve not just a second term, but strategically entrench a loyal machine across the entire government, reversing those fundamental changes years down the line would be exponentially more difficult than stopping them in the present moment when democratic institutions still possess some residual strength. Entrenched regimes also often fundamentally alter the ingrained culture and operational norms of institutions.
This culture changes.
For example, transforming the military or the courts into partisan actors loyal to the leader. Even if a new, genuinely democratic government eventually replaces the autocrat later, it may inherit a deeply politicized bureaucracy and a profoundly cynical public, distrustful of all institutions. Consider the monumental task facing any future reformist government in post-Orban Hungary or post-Erdogan Turkey. They would confront the Herculean task of having to rebuild institutional capacity, public trust, and a democratic culture from scratch.
It's a massive rebuilding job.
Massive. As an astute analyst quipped, resisting state capture as it advances is hard enough. Reversing it once it has taken hold is an even taller order. The takeaway, therefore, is crystal clear and demands urgent attention. The costs of delaying action until later are far, far higher than the costs of acting now when it comes to defending democracy itself.
So ultimately, this stability rhetoric, which sounds so appealing on the surface, is largely a cynical ploy, nothing more than a branding exercise designed by regimes to legitimize their own self-preservation and permanent hold on power.
What's particularly cynical here is the calculated deployment of this rhetoric. Authoritarians invoke stability, much as they invoke the will of the people. It's a convenient rhetorical device to cloak their blatant power grabs in a veneer of public good and legitimacy.
Justifying the unjustifiable.
Pretty much. Freedom House observers consistently note that anti-democratic leaders pay lip service to the will of the people, only to justify their concentration of power and escalating violations of rights. In the same vein, crackdowns on dissent are disingenuously sold as necessary security measures, and the silencing of critics is strategically framed as quashing chaos or extremism that threatens the social fabric. Americans heard this rationale when federal agents attacked peaceful protesters in 2020 in the name of law and order, and we may hear it again if draconian measures are proposed in coming years.
We have to see through it.
Yes. One must recognize it for what it truly is. Propaganda carefully crafted to excuse authoritarian excesses. True, sustainable stability in a political system comes not from one-man rule or permanent one-party dominance, but from robust, accountable institutions and a populace that genuinely consents to the system because it has a meaningful voice, agency, and representation. Democracies can certainly be messy, raucous, and polarized. The U.S. knows this all too well, yet the answer to those inherent challenges is always more democracy, through better representation, robust dialogue, and continuous reform, not the false, suffocating peace of an imposed political monopoly.
The illusion of stability.
Okay, let's quickly summarize why that promise of stability from authoritarians is so often a dangerous solution.
Right. The key points against the stability myth. First, false promise. Authoritarians offer stability, order, efficiency, but it's really a facade for permanent power.
It looks good, but isn't.
Second, eliminates alternation. Entrenchment removes democracy's crucial safety valve of peaceful power transfer, making the system fundamentally unaccountable.
No way to change course.
Third, breeds corruption. With no fear of electoral loss, entrenched regimes inevitably descend into self-dealing and unpunished graft.
Power corrupts.
Fourth, leads to stagnation. Lack of dissent and oversight stifles innovation and leads to decay in governance and society. Things just get stuck.
Rigidity sets in.
Fifth, history's warning. Regimes claiming permanent stability often face greater, more violent turmoil in the long run. Pressure builds.
Doesn't end well.
Sixth, increasing cost of delay. The longer entrenchment lasts, the harder it is to reverse as it changes institutional cultures deeply.
Harder to fix later.
Seventh, propaganda. That stability rhetoric is mostly a cynical ploy to justify power grabs, not a genuine goal.
Just an excuse.
And finally, true stability. Real, sustainable stability comes from strong, accountable institutions and citizen voice, not an imposed monopoly.
A crucial distinction. Hashtag baseline democratic indicators, for context. Okay, to give us a broader, sobering context for all of this, let's quickly review some critical baseline democratic indicators globally. According to Freedom House, a highly respected independent watchdog, the world has been in a concerning 16-year decline in global freedom. That's quite a trend.
It's a long and worrying trend, and what's particularly insightful here, or perhaps alarming, is the direct impact on the U.S. context. The United States, despite its historical democratic strength, has regrettably not been immune to this alarming global trend.
How so specifically?
U.S. freedom scores, as measured by Freedom House, fell a significant 11 points from 2010 to 2020, with a particularly sharp 6-point drop specifically during Trump's first term. This signals a profound and concerning trend, indicating genuine democratic backsliding within a long-established democracy.
And globally.
To connect this to the bigger picture of global governance, the highly regarded Varieties of Democracy VDEM project reports that as of 2023, 72% of the world's population, a staggering 5.7 billion people, live under autocratic regimes. 72%.
Wow.
It represents a dramatic increase from just 46% a mere decade earlier. This means autocracies now outnumber full democracies globally, marking the first time in 2 decades that such a critical shift in the global balance of power has occurred.
So the global trend is clearly and powerfully moving away from full democracy. But it's not entirely without hope, right? There are still small, yet significant pockets of democratization occurring, signaling resilience.
Yes, that's important to note. Democratizing efforts, thankfully, haven't entirely ceased. VDEM also notes there are approximately 14 countries currently undergoing democratization, showing improvement, although they collectively represent just 2% of the world's population.
So small numbers, but it's happening somewhere.
Exactly. So while the numbers are indeed small in a global context, the enduring possibility of positive change and democratic renewal remains a crucial point of focus. The United States itself, despite the trends, remains rated free by Freedom House, but it is no longer considered top tier among global democracies.
Not leading the pack anymore.
Not in the same way. In their 100-point score, it registered 3,100 in 2022, placing it somewhat on par with countries like Romania and South Korea, and significantly well below its traditional peers like Canada or most Western European nations. Additionally, the Economist Intelligence Unit, another respected authority, currently classifies the U.S. as a flawed democracy, ranking it a comparatively modest 25th globally in 2024.
A flawed democracy.
Okay.
These baseline facts, I think, truly underscore both the depth of the current democratic recession and the critical, urgent importance of concerted efforts to reverse it. The trend is undeniably bleak, yes, but crucially, it is not irreversible.
That's the key takeaway. Not irreversible.
Around the world, and indeed within the U.S. itself, civic awakenings manifesting in forms ranging from mass protests to surprising electoral upsets have repeatedly shown the inherent resilience potential of democracies when citizens are engaged. America's own rich history, from the transformative civil rights movement to the institutional resilience during the Watergate scandal, powerfully testifies that genuine democratic renewal and course correction often follow when citizens actively confront a constitutional crisis or profound challenge to their system.
This raises an important overarching question for all of us, though. What do these quantitative data points, these indices, truly represent for the future? They are undoubtedly a warning, certainly, but they are emphatically not a predetermined destiny.
Right. It's not set in stone.
Not at all. Ultimately, the fate of American democracy will be decided not by abstract indices, historical precedents, or external assessments, but by the concrete, deliberate actions of Americans themselves in defense of their republic actions that will undeniably write the next decisive chapter of this ongoing global story of democracy under siege.
A powerful and incredibly timely thought for us all to consider. Final chapter recap. Global democratic health. All right, one last recap on the global state of democracy, just to frame everything.
Okay, the vital signs check. First, global decline. The world has seen that steady 16-year decline in global freedom with a significant rise in autocracies.
Downward trend.
Second, U.S. backsliding. The U.S. freedom scores have dropped, especially during Trump's first term. Still free, but showing strain.
Not immune.
Third, autocracy dominates. 72% of the world's population now lives under autocratic regimes, outnumbering full democracies for the first time in 20 years.
A major shift.
Fourth, pockets of hope. While small, only 2% of world pop, some countries are actively democratizing, showing reversals are possible.
Signs of life.
Fifth, U.S. status. Rated 3,100 by Freedom House, called a flawed democracy by The Economist, not top tier anymore.
Room for improvement.
And the crucial implication. These indicators serve as a stark warning, but are absolutely not a fixed destiny. It emphasizes the ongoing struggle and the real potential for resilience and renewal.
It's up to us, basically. Hashtag outro. So today, we've taken a really deep dive into the complex, often concerning, yet ultimately hopeful pathways of democratic backsliding. We've meticulously seen how authoritarian entrenchment is methodically achieved through a calculated combination of subtle rule changes, the strategic use of patronage to capture vital institutions, and the pervasive, paralyzing use of fear to silence opposition.
The playbook laid bare.
Exactly. But critically, we've also explored compelling evidence that this path is not necessarily a definitive point of no return. Democratic reversal, while hard-won and often partial, remains profoundly possible through courageous, collective action that strategically leverages the remaining levers of a democratic system.
It takes effort, but it's possible.
It is. The experiences of countries like Hungary and Turkey serve as stark, unequivocal warnings of how quickly democratic erosion can occur, transforming a liberal democracy into a competitive authoritarian regime. Conversely, Slovakia and Brazil offer potent, inspiring examples of determined pushback succeeding, even at critical junctures when democracy seemed truly on the brink of collapse.
Which brings us directly back to the United States. To connect this to the bigger picture, the U.S. finds itself at a profound crossroads, much like other nations that have flirted with competitive authoritarianism. Down one path lies a dangerous slide into entrenched pseudo-democracy, insidiously justified by those hollow, often manipulative promises of stability and order.
The easy-sounding path.
Right. Down the other lies a potential yet demanding renewal of democratic norms, achievable through conscious, concerted effort, robust coalition building across traditionally diverse groups, and perhaps a measure of institutional luck and inherent resilience.
The harder but necessary path.
Arguably.
The thesis at hand, illuminated by our deep dive, seems clear. American competitive authoritarianism, if it were to consolidate, will likely do so via these very insidious mechanisms: fundamental rule changes, pervasive patronage, and the strategic deployment of fear. But our extensive exploration has also made it unequivocally clear that reversal remains profoundly possible if diverse pro-democracy coalitions strategically seize existing choke points within the system to effectively block or begin to unwind that consolidation.
The if is doing a lot of work there.
It is. The task is undoubtedly daunting, demanding sustained vigilance and effort. But as of 2025, the United States is still, by the Economist measure, a flawed democracy, not a failed one. Some 45% of the world's people still live in democracies, a shrinking share, yes, but tens of millions of Americans are among them, and their collective agency is powerful.
Which raises an important final question for all of us, doesn't it? The coming months and years will undeniably test whether the U.S. can muster the collective will and strategic foresight to fortify its institutions and unify its people across entrenched old divides in defense of the Republic. History isn't written yet. It is a dynamic, unfolding narrative. The paths of no return and return are both squarely before us, accessible through our choices.
So the ultimate question for you, the listener, for us all is, which path will we collectively choose, and what concrete actions will each of us take to ensure the next chapter of this ongoing global story of democracy under siege is one of resilience, renewal, and ultimately return?